Okay, the karma of the liberated. It's a problem, you know. It's a legitimate question. We always have to deal with this question because, okay, now I'm free. What about karma? Huh? Because karma doesn't care if you're liberated. When you're free, the world goes right on, and karma keeps being karma. So, does it affect me, and does it change me? What does my karma? What happens to my karma when I understand who I am? What's my relationship to karma from that point on? The results of actions done before liberation fructify like an arrow released from a bow. If before you're enlightened you did a particular action, and then you rise above the doer of the action and realize your awareness. Now you're situated as awareness. You're no longer the doer, but the doer created an action and shot a pistol or shot an arrow. That arrow has what? Is going to continue on and strike the object. If in the meantime I shoot an arrow, they got a, here, the next one says, an arrow intended for a tiger doesn't stop mid-flight when the archer realizes that he mistook a cow for a tiger. Right? You did the action, it's got to fructify, because actions are taking place in the Dharma field, and once you introduce an action into the field, it has to fructify. There's no other option. You can do all your magical thinking in your mind, and you can think you can control your karma when you're enlightened, but you cannot, because karma is not in your hands. It isn't before enlightenment, it isn't after enlightenment. Whose hands is it in? Ishvara. It belongs to the field. It doesn't belong to the self, and it doesn't belong to what? The jiva, the individual. It belongs to Ishvara. So Ishvara is going to go right on cranking out actions and making results for actions. If you're enlightened or not. Ishvara does not care if you're enlightened. Ishvara just sees you as a doer doing actions. So those actions have to fructify. If an action that you didn't fructify, the whole universe would not work. The whole thing would fall apart. Because there is an inviolable relationship between the cause and the effect. And Ishvara is the one that keeps that relationship between the cause and effect constant. If it's not constant, you just can't get out of bed in the morning. You won't know that when you brush your teeth are going to get clean. What if Ishvara decides to change the rules, and when I brush my teeth, they get dirty? So, when you brush your teeth, they get filthy, because Ishvara changed the rules. Or, come on, it's not going to happen, is it? Or I get out of bed in the morning, and gravity suddenly decides, I think I'll go up instead of down. I'm so fed up with pulling everything down, I think now I'll make everything go up. That's gravity. It changes its mind. So now I get out of bed in the morning, I reach to step on the floor, and suddenly I find myself on the ceiling. How's that? Are you going to get out of bed? You're not going to do anything. Because you have no way to tell what the result of an action will be. So you'll just be totally frustrated. You'll sit there with all those desires and no way to actualize those desires. Because the field will be completely irrational. It will be a chaos. Anything could happen. You put some sugar in your tea, and just then when you pour it in, the sugar says, oh, today I'm sour. I'm in a bad mood today. I won't be sweet today. I'll be cranky. So sugar suddenly turns sour, and then what? You drink your coffee. and you're unhappy. Ishvara keeps the sugar sweet from one day to the next. That's its nature. It's going to do that. So everything here in this apparent reality behaves according to its nature. And whether you like it or not, whether you know it or not, it's going to work that way. So you do an action, it's going to have a result. But, okay, but what? But it's not correct to say that the liberated are affected by the results of their past actions. Oh. Just as it's not correct to say that a person who killed someone in a dream should be held accountable when he or she wakes up. Thank you, Roz, for that. Informing us of that earlier. The infallible, because it's in a different order of reality. They're in two different orders of reality. So now I'm no longer in this order of reality. Now I'm in this order of reality. And what? Whatever happens here doesn't apply to here. Whatever happens to the pot doesn't happen to the clay, does it? The clay remains clay. Whatever happens to the pot, if the pot breaks, the clay is still clay. You haven't lost any clay when you break the pot. Huh? Or you make the pot, you make the clay into a plate. Nothing's changed from the clay's perspective, has it? It's still clay. Now it's clay in the form of a plate. Before it was clay in the form of a pot. But clay is totally unchanged, irrespective of what happens in the apparent reality. So what? So I'm just looking at things from the self means what? All that stuff doesn't affect me anymore.
So what would happen, for example, in the case of somebody who can take a fork and bend it just simply by looking at it?
You mean like Uri Geller?
Yeah.
All that.
What do you mean, what would happen to?
No, I'm saying...
Actually, Uri Geller's been totally discredited. It's totally discredited. There's no, and the scriptures is clear about that. I'm just finishing a book on Panchadasi where they're in two different orders of the same reality.
Well, whether
In fact, the way he would do it was, it was like magic tricks. Magicians can do it easily. In fact, there's a guy who spent his whole life debunking Uri Geller and all these magical things. I've forgotten his name now. It was a very interesting article, long article in the last New York Times magazine. And he actually made Uri Geller more famous because people wanted to believe that he actually was bending spoons, even though this guy showed that he wasn't. And many other people replicated those. Sai Baba, there's another one. There are tons of magicians that came forward and replicated the miracles that Sai Baba did. But people their faith even grew stronger when somebody debunked it. No, there's actually anyway, that's not your question really.
Is there a bending of reality when that happens? Because I've seen it myself in front of me.
Okay. Bending of reality means what?
Well,
Special powers.
you're changing, for example, the sugar from being sweet to being sour. You're changing the nature of the fork, which is a fork, to being twisted like a corkscrew.
Okay, but it's still a fork. It's a twisted fork now. Did he change the fork into an elephant?
No.
Why not? If he can change the fork, if he can bend the fork, why can't he change the fork into an elephant?
Okay.
Huh? Or into sugar, or into any other substance. Nothing happened to the fork. The fork was still a fork. It was still silver. It was bent silver after, and now it was it's not bent silver before, but it's still the same, isn't it? No actual bending of reality took place. Just the name and the form of the silver changed. Because fork is just what? Is just a name and a form that's superimposed upon silver. Now, did any bending actually take place? If that level, that dimension of reality is real, then what? Is unreal, then how could it affect the silver? And it doesn't affect the silver. It's only an illusion in your mind that the thing is bent. In other words, you're believing your senses. That's all you're doing. But even science tells you that what your senses report is not what's actually going on out there, isn't it? All of elementary particle physics point out that when you're looking at an object, you're not seeing what the object actually is. All your senses are interpreting certain qualities of the object, but you're never actually experiencing the object itself. And so when you get in a certain frame of mind, you know, things will change. We call this the pratibhasika level of reality. There are 3 levels of reality. The paramartika level, that's pure awareness, where there's only pure consciousness. Then there's the empirical level. That's the level of forks and spoons and so forth. That's the scientific level, or the objective level. Okay? That's where all this objects work, and they work according to certain immutable physical laws. And then there's another dimension in between. That's called pratibhasika satyam. And that's the subjective dimension. And people who are in the subjective dimension, just like when you're in a dream, this is just the dream aspect of the waking state, people who are in that dimension believe that what they actually experience what they see in their mind. In other words, they project what they see in their mind on the material. This is why people, there's a woman one time I was teaching her, and she had a strong pratibhasika. She was totally subjective. So one day I came out of my room, and I said, I'm leaving, I'm going to town, and would you like anything? And she came, followed with me out to the car. And I got in the car, and then she said, look, James, look. There was a big tree there. She said, see that, look at the sage. There's a sage standing right by that tree. You know? And I looked, and I couldn't see any sage. So I said, well, excuse me, Shanti, but I'm afraid I don't see a sage. She said, oh, I know you're just being modest. You're pretending that you don't see it. You're pretending that you... I said, no, honestly, I don't see it. You see a sage. I see a sage. That sage is there. You know, people, that's a dimension of reality that you get into where you confuse what you're thinking and feeling with what is actually there, and you project it. And when your mind changes, the object changes, because the object is only in your mind.
Are you saying that that spoon didn't bend?
It doesn't bend. It bends if you bend it. It bent, but you know how he bent it? He'd do what every magician does. He'd distract your attention, then he'd bend it with the other hand, and then he'd present it like this, and then it was bent. You think, oh my God, it got bent.
But if he's holding it like that and it's turned and it's actually bending.
No, that's the old Indian rope trick. The Indians did that all forever. They get you all worked up, and then that Indian guy would climb, he'd make a rope go up, and then he'd climb up the rope and disappear. You know very well that's not what happened. You know very well. You saw a dream, and you took the dream to be real.
Just, how is it useful?
Huh? Yeah, and anyway, so what? So what? Now I've got a bent spoon. I didn't have to go to Uri Geller to bend a spoon. I could just bend a spoon. There's a great story in our texts. There was this at Benares on the Ganges River, Varanasi. There's a big kind of open sandbar on the other side of the river, and then the city's all on this side. And there was this old Mahatma sitting there on the side of the banks, and he saw a man on the other side of the river, a yogi. And he's watching that yogi, and the yogi walks right across the water. He just walks across the water like Christ. He just walks right across the water. And he comes up and he stops right where the Mahatma is sitting. And he said to the Mahatma, he said, well, what do you think of that, Maharaj? And the Maharaj said, the Guru said, oh, that's very interesting. Now, how long did it take you to learn that siddhi, that power? How long did that take you? He said, well, honestly, 30 years. To be honest with you, it took me 30 years to learn how to walk on water. And the Mahatma said, gee, you know, for like 2 rupees and 3 minutes, I can get across there. Huh? Just get in a boat and go across the water. So what? So the body was here and now it's here. It's still a body, it's still water. Nothing's happened. But we're so fascinated. We have this magical thinking, you know, and we want to believe that we have the power to manipulate matter with our minds. Matter is being manipulated every second by what? Ishwara's mind, but not by our small minds. And what we want, because we feel powerless and small, what we want to do is we want to feel big. So we want to feel powerful. This is that whole fascination you find in the yoga world, in the spiritual world, with being powerful and magnetizing objects to yourself and making things happen, just with your mind, right? It's only based upon what? The belief that what? I'm powerless. And that by what? Gaining some kind of power, I'm going to be whole and complete and big again. So, if he did bend it with his mind, fair enough. If he didn't, fair enough. Who cares? It's not, you know. If he can cure cancer, fair enough. They say, oh, he cured cancer with his, we went to a healer in the jungle and he's curing cancer. Okay, well then why doesn't he just invite everybody down and cure everybody's cancer, and cancer will be gone. But somehow cancer just keeps happening over and over and over again. And all those healings, what are they? Big deal. Nothing's actually happened. See? Anyway, let's not get off on that. That's a sidetrack. So, okay, but it is relevant. Because the problem is it's a confusion between what? Vyavaharika Satyam, the empirical reality, and Pratibhasika Satyam, the subjective reality. Religious people have this. They actually see Jesus. And so when they actually see Jesus, nobody else sees Jesus, but what? They see Jesus. And they think that you're not a believer. They think that you're a heathen or what, a sinner, because you can't see Jesus. They do see Jesus, but the Jesus they see is only in here, but the illusion, the belief is so strong, it looks like there's actually a Jesus out there in the world. It happened to me one time. It was very funny. I was out fishing in my cabin in Montana. I spent the whole day fishing. Had a great time. And when I came in, the phone rang to the cabin, and it was a woman I'd met years before, and I was kind of like a guru for her. I never thought I was a guru for her, but I was a kind of inspirational figure or like that for her. And she said, thank you. And I said, for what? She said, for coming. She was in Switzerland, and I was in Montana. She said, thank you for coming. And I said, coming? Tell me about it. I was kind of curious to know what it was. So tell me about it. She said, well, as you know, I've been very, very sick. I didn't know she'd been very, very sick. In fact, the doctors told her she was on death's door, that she just had, I don't know, weeks to live or days, I don't know what. But she was firmly convinced that she was about to die. She was in bed, bedridden, couldn't move, and a lot of pain and suffering. And she said, and I'm totally healed right now, and thank you. And I said, well, what did I have to do? Well, she said, don't be modest. She said, you came and you touched my foot. You came to the end of my bed and you touched my foot, and all the pain and suffering and the disease all went away, and I'm totally miraculous and totally healed. And I said, well, gee, that's great. I'm happy for you. But actually, I was out fishing all day long on the river. Now, actually, that's what she actually experienced. She actually experienced me coming there. She actually thought it was a real person and so forth. And so, well, what happened? In other words, what actually, how did that healing work? because I was a symbol of herself, I was a symbol of her spiritual thing. When she thought of me, it invoked the self. And when it invoked the self, the power or the Shakti that was coming from the self cleaned out her nerve currents, her nadis, where this stuff was. In other words, this energy just flowed through her, and the healing was all what? Only in the subtle dimension. The pain, the suffering was only in the subtle dimension, but she had projected the pain onto the physical dimension, and when the Shakti cleaned out the energy, what? Cleared all of those channels, those nerve channels, the physical thing just disappeared. That's all. So the self healed her through the symbol, and I was the symbol. That's all. Mind is very powerful, but there's no changing dimensions. If you could alter the course of material reality would be under the control of jivas. And then what? What I want to happen, what? Is going to impede you or bless you according to my desires, wouldn't it be? And then what's going to happen? Anybody who had that power is going to start messing with material reality, and then we're all screwed. We're lucky that there's only one person that can change material reality and to create it and sustain it and destroy it, and that's Ishwara, and that's not a person. That's an impersonal power or a pure impersonal force that maintains, sustains, and destroys the creation, right, by the virtue of universal knowledge. Thank God. Thank God that God's God and not a big human being.